Welcome to the Rhythms of Focus podcast for wandering minds who are tired of feeling that they have to force themselves to make things happen. Maybe know that when things line up well, that tendency to wander actually becomes a powerful wave of focus. I'm Dr. Kourosh, Dini, fellow wandering mind. It wasn't that long ago that I struggled to make things happen, whether it was to remember when to pay a bill, do things over time, or look at a list without feeling repulsed. Fast forward through years of study and practice, I can now not only deal with the world, I can be creative, playful, and engage in the ways that make sense to me. I can be a doctor, musician, father, still play games in the evenings. I've created this podcast to share these ideas so you can do the same, hopefully with a lot less of the troubles I needed to go through to get here. Whether you have ADHD, deal with anxiety, or just suffer from a powerfully creative spirit, I invite you to join me in this weekly podcast to start finding your own way to a calmer, more intuitive space. Please note, I'm not functioning as your doctor, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, therapist, or otherwise. This is here for education, if not entertainment, and I do hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, this is Kourosh. We're hanging out here. It's got another episode of the Rhythms of Focus, and today we've got a guest. We've got Neal Foard, and this is unique to me in that all the guests that I've worked with so far, people that I've known, people that have been kind of just I've known them. We've interacted and connected. Neal reached out to me in an email, and I'm like, okay, let me take a look here. And I started watching some of his Instagram posts, and I started watching some of his YouTube posts, and it became very clear that Neal knows story. He has a skill that is clearly, whether he's had a talent with it, I like have a talent with piano, but then beyond that, there's practice. You know there has to be practice. It's not just talent. And I deeply respect the idea of story because, for many reasons. One is it's such an organizer of thought. It's so much a part of what makes humans themselves and human. It's a thing that becomes difficult for the wandering mind, for ADHD, for those who've been through difficult times in their lives, sometimes even thinking of story. So much of my work as doing therapeutic work is trying to understand and work together to piece together a story of someone's life and this sort of thing. And I'm just like, so anyway, watching Neal do this, he had several of these sort of clips, and I'm like, wow, like in 2 minutes or less, a lot of these clips were like, wow, okay. So then I reached out. I said, okay, let's see where this goes. Anyway, Neal's here. Please give yourself an introduction, or say hi, or however you want to. I, as they say, I'm not just the business owner. I'm also a customer of a wandering mind. So, please feel free.
I come from 30 years in advertising. I used to be in the creative end of the business, and in that 30 years, I spent a big chunk of it trying to persuade clients to either take us on as an advertising agency or to agree to do the commercials and the print ads and so forth that we would recommend for them. Now, what I did not know going into that career, I thought that most of my creative energy would be spent on coming up with concepts that were entertaining and fulfilling and made you really like the brands that you were that were competing for your attention and for your money, only to discover that the vast bulk of my time was in trying to persuade the people that were paying for it to buy it. And so thousands of presentations taught me, perversely, paradoxically, the presentations that worked were the exact same science that worked in advertising, which is it isn't enough to simply bullet point people with the attributes of something. You have to make it come to life in their mind, and you have to trigger the emotion of caring. Do I care what happens? The great secret to all of the best novels and all of the great stories of history and show business celebrity is, do I care what happens to this person? And you will many times encounter in advertising that you don't care at all. And the reason is that the manufacturer, the producer, they are completely in it for themselves. They are only foisting it into the market and abusing your attention and interrupting your day strictly out of their own objectives. They want to fleece you like a sheep. as opposed to somebody that does a beautiful Christmas message or an inspiring Olympics message or a marvelously entertaining little playlet about enjoying Sunday dinner with your estranged father. These things, they seat in the mind through the emotions, and they become perpetual. They trigger your affections. This is a more than 100,000-year-old technology. Storytelling is how human beings, it's our default factory setting of how we take in, store, remember, and then repeat information. Because emotional memories are very strong and easy to recall. And chances are, Kourosh, when you smell something and it triggers a memory, it's not a random memory. It's a memory attached to someone or something that was meaningful to you. Even if it is a certain smell of sage and it reminds you of a summer in the eastern Sierra Nevadas, there's a reason that triggers a memory for you, is because that was a deeply emotional moment. Something about it what triggered the emotions. So my background was in trying to persuade clients and doing thousands of presentations. And that, just like you say, there was a certain amount of talent there, but really what it is, it's the craft of practice that makes you a good ice skater or skateboarder or a rugby player or tennis player. Well, it's the same thing for storytelling. When you get enough reps in, like a stand-up comedian doing a set night after night after night, you get pretty good at it. You figure out where the laugh is going to land and where the emotional signature is going to be. And what I discovered is when you get pretty good at telling a story, you also, along with it comes the ability to move people emotionally. And I want to tell your listeners something that happened in the conversation before we went on, Mike. And that is that I was congratulating Dr. Dini on his role in the universe, which is he is out there trying to provide something very useful, very soothing. He's trying to help a common complaint brought on by the age we live in. We are inundated. We are awash in negativity, division, deliberate rage baiting, deliberate fear mongering. Algorithms are registering engagement, and they know that a certain amount of terror and division is good for engagement. So what do? They serve it to you nonstop. Well, we can either passively just let it happen, or we can do something about it. And so, Kourosh, that's why I reached out, is because we're sort of kindred spirits in this mission, which is I would like to create a sense of calm, that not everybody is out to get you, that there are more good people than bad. And I mean way more good people than bad. And let me give you a small example of what I mean. So I live in Los Angeles, and when you go in LA on certain parts of the freeway, it will be as much as 20 lanes across, coming and going. There'll be 10 lanes heading south and 10 north. When you are on a section of freeway like that, there is a good chance that over the course of an hour-long drive, you will pass or be passed by somewhere in the neighborhood of between 50,000 and 500,000 cars. Now, in all that time, with all those people piloting death machines, how many times is there a dirt bag upsetting you? 4 times, maybe? The proportion is so small. I offer this as evidence that most people mind their business. They take care not to interrupt your day. If you really counted the number of times somebody does something nasty versus the number of times somebody does something nice, it's just, I'll give you an example of this, one of those little nice things. So I was driving along and somebody wanted to feather in. It was going to be really difficult because every car was sort of bumper to bumper, but I saw that this person he was in a Honda CRV. So I backed off to let him in. And then he gave me one of those little rear window wiper things, where he flicks the switch so that it'll give me a little wave with the window wiper. And I thought he didn't have to do that, but that was such a great gesture that powers me through the next 3 dirt bags. And this is the fact of human existence. Have you ever heard that there was an anthropologist, and I don't know whether it's Margaret Mead or who it was, but they were saying, what do you consider the first evidence of civilization? And she said, a healed femur. because somebody who's broken their femur means that they're going to be laid up for 9 months. They can't walk for 9 months. That's how long it takes a femur to heal. And that some Neanderthal back, 150,000 years ago was being taken care of for a year by his tribe, even though he couldn't contribute meaningfully. That's how people are. They will help each other, even when we were flea-bitten, nasty, violent, what's the word? Life was nasty, brutish, and short. Even back then, people were able to support and take care of one another. And go ahead. I'm sorry. You're just about to say something.
No, just the idea of central to what I'm hearing in all of this is that concept is the emotion of care. And when I think of care, it's wonderful, it's powerful, it's all the good things, but it's also it's so complex in that one is that there's a limit, that we all are dealing with limits, right? To care means we're drawing on something within ourselves. Yeah. We're drawing on our attention, our time. Where do we put that attention and time? And so we have to make a decision as to how we care.
Yeah.
And then we have to care for ourselves in the process, and that might touch off feelings of selfishness and all that. And then as a result of that, it might touch off feelings of guilt, if not shame. And then do I worry enough? Do I not? And so we confuse things,
Right.
And so in this age, as you're describing it, and how easy it is to launch anger and rage and these sorts of things. I mean, they're destructive, but in one sense, they're also easy. It's very easy to become. The mind is designed to find problems and solve them and move them on, and that's, at least it's one of the major things it does. But it's very easy to get lulled into a feeling of well, I can solve problems by smashing them, and right, that's what rage tends to be. It's like there's this object, there's a thing I want, whether it's safety or love or whatever it is, and I can't seem to get it, so let me just mount this really rageful response and I'll bust my way through. And so we were talking just before this, about how the much of what we find on social media and the rest, there's this thread of rage and anger and this sort of thing that really is out there. But it's harder to care, not because care isn't there, as you point out, but I think there's a skill to it. And I think, bringing this back to the idea of story, weaving that in and using the tool of story as a part of that, I think is, I think there's a skill to that. I think there's a practice to that.
Mm. What I have discovered in my own life is, no doubt you've heard this old trope, which is people don't care what you think until they think you care. And it's certainly true in business that for two people to have an economic relationship in sort of client and supplier, doctor and patient, police officer and citizen, each of them has to have sufficient faith that the other person is not operating completely out of self-interest. I have watched a very interesting case of a car dealer, and car dealers are a really good example of the economic model is not incentivized for you to be good to people. The economic model's incentive is for you to chisel people and to use your power of information to try to squeeze the maximum amount of money out of somebody, even to the point where that car is going to get repossessed because you financed it for 8 years at an egregious interest rate just to move another Dodge Ram. I have watched, though, incredibly powerful salespeople and dealers act in the interest of their customer because they wanted to be a repeat business agency. And they'll do, strictly out of self-interest, they will do things like, oh, Mrs. Hodgson Curtis comes in, she's got a 25-year-old Corolla, she needs a tune-up and a brake job. So you go to your service manager and say, listen, do me a favor. If the bill's less than $300, do me a favor, just give it to Mrs. Hodgson Curtis, but don't tell her it's from me and don't tell her it's the policy of the place. Just tell her it's from you. I want her to think she's got a guy. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is a marketing expense. And the reason is she's not going to shut up about it. She's going to tell everyone how nice Ron is down at that Toyota dealer. And then everybody's going to show up looking for you, Ron. So do me a favor, never cheat anybody, don't chisel anybody, don't schedule service they don't need. You are going to be my Superman. You're going to be Judge Wapner. You're going to be the one person in the car business everybody can, and we're going to use you as the case study. And sure enough, word spreads fast in that business. Now, completely out of self-interest, he's doing the right thing. He's being nice. He's building relationships. He's treating business as an opportunity to create relationships with people. Mm-hmm. And what's so nice about relationships is, weirdly, they're very efficient. It's paradoxical, but building relationships is incredibly efficient because the next time they show up for a car, we don't argue. We just go right to, I'm going to make sure you get taken care of. Don't worry. I'll have you out of here in 3 hours or less. And I know that you could probably do better on this price, or at least it's going to look like you could do better. But there's a reason I'm charging you this, and it's because of all of the extras that I'm throwing in as part of my thing. But you're going to get out of here knowing you did pretty well, and you're not going to have a 6-hour, 2 days of 6-hour arguing with somebody. And down the road when you come in for service, I'm going to give your mom free service anyway, so just relax. So it's very efficient. Everybody moves at the speed of light, and everybody's glad to see one another. And, you know, it's actually worth it's worth losing a little money to make a friend. But if I could return to something you said before, which is the amount of energy it takes to care. I know exactly what you're talking about, this fatigue that sets in when you can't save everybody. You have to be on the receiving end of a little kindness of your own, which is to acknowledge that you can't save every stray animal. And just like when you're on the airplane, and all of the flight attendants will tell you, you put on your oxygen mask before your child's. Because I don't want you both gassing out because you didn't have enough oxygen trying to put the thing on your kid. You need to save yourself first, and then you can save others. And I think that principle applies here as well. If you find yourself getting fatigued, you just can't save everyone. You can't give everything. You've got to give yourself some latitude.
You know, in both of those examples, the flying example, but also the business one, right? So I think they both touch on that same idea of how important it is to support yourself in the process of caring. You know, so the person who's the car dealer has to make a living. They're trying to function. And so at the same time creates this situation that, you know, you could look at it in a pessimistic view of saying, oh, well, now they're just trying to extend a long relationship and make it on the long end, right? Fine. But it makes the assumption that business or money or anything like that is a negative to begin with, which it's not. It's a tool, it's a thing, it's a part of it. And once you recognize that these things can be aligned, that these things can create a business, you can function, you can have things work for you at the same time as you have it work for others, you know, that you can create the sort of, that there's a symbiosis that we're looking for, not this parasitic relationship.
There's another really, really good example from the same Toyota dealer. Okay. And this is to me, this is genius level. This is orders of magnitude smarter than any of his colleagues. So what he did was he did a service campaign. You know, most of a dealer's income comes from them repairing the cars, not selling them. And regular scheduled maintenance is their bread and butter. That's how they pay for the operation. And then after that, everything's gravy. Well, what this guy did was he didn't want to have to argue with anybody about the price of the service because he had very good mechanics, and he made a really strong, he was always sending his guys for coaching. They were all certified, and he always felt a little chiseled by people coming in and arguing about what it costs. He's like, yeah, but I mean, these are the top 3% in the state. You pay for what you get what you pay for. So what he decided to do contained both an overt cleverness, and then unexpected dividends. So here was the overt cleverness. He said, "I'm tired of arguing with people over what it costs. So instead of advertising my service, I'm gonna advertise for mechanics." And what he did was he did this ad where he said, "Are you the best mechanic you know in the state of Pennsylvania? Are you in the top 3%? Because if you are, I want you to call me. I love good mechanics. I used to be a mechanic. I know good ones when I see them. And here's my deal. I pay top dollar here because I only want the best. I will, if you come work for me for 3 years, I'll give you the Snap-on tools. That's the only kind I use. I certify all my guys. I send them for coaching. It is cool here in the summer and it is warm in the winter. You can eat off the floors. And here's my private number. Call me on this number. I will talk to you. Let's make it happen." Okay, so there were a bunch of crazy dividends. The first was what he expected, which is people stopped arguing about what it costs because everybody all across the state goes, "Well, if you want the best, that's where you go." Second dividend was his own crew started coming to him and going, "Hey, I'm a little spooked that maybe you're going to get rid of me because I don't know if I'm in the top 3%. He goes, "Well, Rick, if you want to be in the top 3%, I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret. The region doesn't charge me for them coaching you up on the new certified stuff. If you want to know all the new nav systems, if you want to get titled, if you want to get coached up on all the new hybrid stuff, I'll send you there. It doesn't cost me a nickel. So you just tell me what you want to learn." So his guys go, "Great." So they all got coached up, his own crew. The phone was ringing all the time. Guys saying, "I want to work where it's warm in the winter." And so he really did get the cream of the cream. But very good mechanics work fast. And so he actually paradoxically was charging what everybody else charged, but he was making more money on it because the turnover was faster. He was processing more repairs. But these are all the selfish things. Then there was this benefit. One day his service manager comes to him and says, "Hey, I think you're going to get a kick out of this. How many shirts do you think the boys wear? How many do they buy of our team shirts here?" It was 4. And he goes, "Typical is 3, 1 in the locker, 1 on their back, 1 in the wash. How many do you think your boys buy?" "I don't know. They buy 6. You know why? Because they've got 3 at work and they've got 3 at home. And the ones they have at home are so they can wear them out to dinner with their families because they want everybody knowing where they work." And this guy went, "Wow, that's cool." So you tell me if you want that kind of guy, A, working for you, and B, preaching the evangel out there in the world for you. Because you know that if they've got 3 shirts at home, it's not because they're just wearing them out to dinner with their families. They're wearing them to Lowe's, to Home Depot. They're spreading the word. Now, all of this starts with a kind of, I just want the business advantage. I'm tired of having to argue over the price. But what it amounts to is a kind of mindset among his own people, which was pride based on real value, real achievement. And the whole place, you should have seen the place when the guy would walk into a room. You know how people are. Sometimes, when the boss comes around, everybody goes, "Hide, the boss is coming." But it was the exact opposite with this guy. When he would walk into a room, the whole place would light up. And customers were thrilled to meet him. "You're the guy on the radio. I recognize the voice. Does that number really reach you?" "It sure does." And he really would. He would just shunt it off to an assistant. But he really would answer the phone. It was calling all day. And the vibe became a self-fulfilling flywheel prophecy, which was, this is how we are. This is the type of organization we are. And oh my God, he grew and grew and grew. And he was such a sweetheart. He had a daughter-in-law who was a physician, and she was brilliant. And he kept saying, "I don't know how my son ever managed to score this well, but God bless you." Well, she was a very accomplished physician. She worked at a hospital. And one day she comes to him and she says, "May I get some advice from you, Dad? I'd like to get your opinion about this. I like being a doctor. I'm very good at it. And the thing is, though, that we've just given birth to your first granddaughter and, I'll get my typical maternity leave, but then after I have to make the decision about whether I'm going to be a full-time mom or whether I'm going to go back to work in the hospital. And if I don't go back to work, the problem then is I get out of date. You know how you got to stay current. You've got to have a track record that says I've been in the hospital, to advance and to become a bigger. And I just like your thoughts on the subject. And he says, well, you have to admit, I'm not a disinterested bystander here. As far as I'm concerned, it's like whatever they're paying you, I will double it just so that you stay home with my granddaughter. That's what I'd like to happen. But let's look at it objectively. Okay, let's look at it objectively. Here's what I get out of this if you did decide to stay home. You can have as many children as you want now. I mean, within reason. You could, if you want a big family, you can do a big family. And what's more, I think you'll find that life every bit as satisfying as returning to the hospital. If you're worried about your income over time, I really wouldn't worry about that because, in my opinion, that's why I do what I do. That's what the money's for. And let me throw one extra wrinkle at you if this is of any consequence. Suppose I hired you to be the family doctor for our extended family. You'd probably be pretty busy. We got about 50 people in this train, cousins and cousins upon cousins. But how would you feel about making that your family practice? What do you think? And she ultimately came back and said, this is a dream come true. This is absolutely everything I wanted. They wound up having, I think, 4 kids, which they would not have done. Yeah. Now, what I like about it is that he was telling me this story because he wanted to say, this is what the money's for. The money is so that you can make decisions like that. Mm-hmm. So that ultimately, you could say, arguably, he's spending it entirely on himself, which in a way he is. But at the same time, he's built himself an ecosystem where by spending it on others, he is spending it on himself.
Money is such a powerful symbol, right? It can mean so many things. It's I don't know when it was invented, but just the concept of let's have a thing represent value.
Yeah.
And then
we have to agree that this is what's going to be the fungible. Right? Yeah.
And then that suddenly becomes representative of power, of status, of the ability to live longer, the ability to care, to be able to survive. It means so many different things. And when it becomes a thing of, let's say, power, that the pursuit of power or the pursuit of, sometimes that's at least in my head, it's a sublimated or changed sort of pursuit of immortality. It's like as long as I have enough money.
Oh, yeah.
It's you may not consciously recognize it, but it becomes this sort of thing. Then then there's no end. You just keep.
Yes, it's a drug at that point. It's not
Right.
currency. You just can't snort enough of it up your nose.
Exactly.
It becomes less and less effective at what it's supposed to do. Can I throw one thing at you? The historians believe that writing began with money, which is the only reason anybody ever wrote anything down was so that they could make tallies on stone tablets, and that it was the tally marks that led to the phonetic construction of written language. Yeah. So that money predates, predates literature. Although, we all were born in a great oral tradition, most tribal, because gossip around the campfire was the absolute default setting for human being communication. But let me throw something else at you, which is I worked briefly in Hong Kong for 2 years, and I was always discovering Chinese idioms that I thought were very revealing. And one of them was, money is the only family member that will not betray you.
Huh.
And that society in Hong Kong was absolutely a money-based culture. I don't say that as a criticism. That was simply the fact of it, is that everybody worked like mules. 6 days a week was the sort of standard. Everybody was stressed out of their minds. And partly because, when you're just inches away from the Chinese Communist border, the only thing that's going to help you flee is how much money do you have. And so there was enormous amounts of speculation, huge amounts of gambling, and it really became the gasoline, the oxygen of the entire place. So that sort of phrase, money is the only relative that won't betray you, is a really indicative of, wow, the entire culture is based on the idea that money will keep you secure from threats.
Right, right. So then that becomes the infinite thing to pursue, at which point it's a drug. And the way I heard I don't know if was he your friend or your car did you know this person, the car dealer that you were talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the way you described him was no, he used it as a tool for the pursuit of caring for his family, for himself. Like it wasn't endless. It didn't have that.
No. In fact, he could have been much, much bigger had he wanted to, but he did spend an adequate amount of time with his own children. He was, I wouldn't call him a philanthropist, but neither was he a skinflint. When he saw somebody in trouble, he was good for it. So yeah, money was very different. It was a different thing for him. It was a little bit like an updraft for him rather than a game.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of it in context of just where story enters, but also where we engage our day to day. And I wonder if, because I'm thinking of it in the minutia, like as I sit down to work on a thing, whatever the thing is, do I take a moment, that deep breath, to look at it and say, this is where my care is here. This is what I care about in what I'm going to do, why I care about this thing. And would that make a difference in how settled I am in it, and how engaged I am with it, the richness of it, to make that conscious, and because I think about it and parallel that to what you were describing in terms of the story of, as you tell a story, as you sell something, with in the advertising days, you would have to ask that question. Like, isn't that the center or a central emotion around which you can build something? A story, a concept, a project. Anyway, I'm not sure where I'm heading with that, but just came to mind.
Well, Yuval Harari would say, at least I think I'm quoting him, he says that the most important stories we tell are the ones we tell ourselves about ourselves. So each of us walks around with a self-image, and we also walk around with a projection of what we would like to be. And it's my belief that if we really took, like I would think that if I'm Kourosh Dini, Kourosh, sorry, then I could make a very quick paragraph of who I am and what I want. And because the way I see it from an outside perspective is, you've found a piece of music, so to speak, that as you play it, it soothes the savage breast. It's a little bit like a pleasant aroma. It's like a pleasant noise. It is when a cat sits on your chest and purrs, this is a piece of music. And that to me is kind of, those are the notes you're striking right now. And as it happens, you have built yourself a machine, an ecosystem, a place where this natural flow of the river happens to go where it needs to go in order to reach its ultimate destination. This is almost the definition of a fulfilling life, is that you have built a system that provides you with what you need to keep it going, to deliver the spiritual dividend that will make you feel like it's all worthwhile. Now, in a kind of perverse way, the negativity and division of our world right now is weirdly what gives you meaning and what gives me meaning, because it defines my mission.
Yeah.
My mission is to try to soothe people's injured psyches. What I don't have is I don't have the advantage of scale. Like, my algorithm isn't out there, working on anybody. But I do think that as long as I keep singing this song, then what will happen is, there's this wonderful poem by Ogden Nash that goes, as you go through life on this terrestrial ball, have all of your conscience or none at all. And I've decided to feed my conscience by making it not about the money, but about the message. And the message is, you are being sold a lie. And the lie is you're surrounded by enemies. You are in danger, and everybody hates you. You are an aggrieved party, and everything you have gotten in your life is well-deserved. And the fact that you have to wait 3 more minutes to get to the gas pump is a travesty, right? This is what you're being sold, no matter who you are on earth. And do you know, I came across this wonderful woman. It's kind of on theme, but forgive me for just repeating it because it just came to mind. This woman says to me that what she likes to do is she likes to go out into the world, and anytime she meets a nice service person, she absolutely makes a point of handwriting a note to the manager about how wonderful that man or woman was. And she calls it a preemptive anti-complaint. And she says, I wouldn't do it except that I know that if they keep this piece of paper, then they can pull it out the next time somebody complains and zero it out. So it's a preemptive anti-complaint is a kind of like get out of jail free card. And I say, well, that takes some energy to write that note. She goes, nope, it doesn't take any energy at all. In fact, by the time I'm finished with the note, I feel better. It's better than any tip you could leave them. A little psychological reassurance, a little reminder that not everybody's awful. You know, when you work in a service job, you're a barista, you're a mechanic, you are, IT. And you're like, I'm trying to help you, bro. Why are you being so mad at me? Like, I'm trying to solve your problem. Well, that's the way the general public is. It walks in angry and it walks out disappointed. So in this act, this preemptive anti-complaint, that's kind of what I've taken on now as my mission, is I want to preemptively get out there in the world and for whoever hears the sound of my voice, say, can I give you some examples of the wonderful things people are capable of and the selfless acts they do. And one of the videos that I did, which I'm very proud of, is based on a restaurant in Japan that was called the Restaurant of Mistaken Orders. Have you heard about this place?
No.
Okay, so this was the brainchild of Shiro Oguni. What happened was he visited an adult home for adults with dementia. And, some of them were Alzheimer's and others, it's just memory problems. And what had happened was they had sequestered all of these older people away from the rest of society. And Shiro looked at this and said, oh, no, this is terrible for them. Removing them from society is only making their situation worse. They need stimulation. They need to feel like they're part of something. So he concocted this restaurant where he was giving them the job of taking people's orders, which of course is a job that requires very good memory. Now, he knows what's going to happen. And so he deliberately calls the place the Restaurant of Mistaken Orders, and everybody understands what the game is. And so you got all these old people, men and women, taking people's orders. And yes, 37% of the time they bring the wrong shit. And 100% of the time, nobody cares. Everybody leaves happy. Everybody leaves happy.
Oh,
and
great.
If you see the film of it, oh, Kourosh, it's the most delightful thing. All these old Japanese women going like this. Oh, going, because they fucked it up. And all the customers are laughing and smiling. And it's, the place was crowded. Now, I told this story, and in spreading that message, it does remind everybody, really, would you have gone to eat there? Oh, of course.
Yeah. Of
course I would go eat there. Would you enjoy it? Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what if you didn't want pancakes? Well, that's my problem.
Something in that strikes me is the acknowledgement of dementia, right? That one of the things that we have a very hard time with, I think, I don't know if that's human, if that's West, if that's anywhere, but it's just a feeling I get, is that we have a hard time acknowledging the same aspects that I think in Buddhism you say is always there. It's aging, it's illness, it's death. These are always there, but we have such a hard time acknowledging it. And you can even see that in the, when we spend however much money in the last 2 weeks of a person's life, which is, right?
Right.
To me, that is
fighting the inevitable.
Right. It's a direct financial measure of our inability to acknowledge the end.
Wow. That's very well put. Yeah. Yeah.
And And what was beautiful about the restaurant is that they put that up front. We are acknowledging there is dementia. We are saying this is a part of life. This is what's happening. They're not saying it's not painful. They're not saying it's not a problem. There is pain. There's certainly suffering. There's all that. But that's not what we're focusing on. It's there. And we'll acknowledge that. And once we acknowledge that, now we're in a new position. Now we can say, we might even be able to have fun with this in some way.
Wow, that's very powerful. There's a folk tale that's relevant to the restaurant, which is, it's a very old folk tale. This woman every day would retrieve water from a river, and she would use these two buckets on the end of a bamboo pole. And one of the buckets was brand new and very solid, and the other bucket was quite a bit older and had developed some small leaks. So by the time she walked all the way home again, well, one bucket, the new one, still had all its water, but the old bucket had lost almost half. And the old water bucket felt very badly about this and said to the woman, "I'm so sorry. I can no longer do my job very well." And the woman turns and points down the road and says, "Do you see on your side of the road all the flowers growing there? Every day you water those flowers. And my walk to and from the river is always filled with beauty." And
that's lovely. Yeah.
What I believe the restaurant achieves is an acknowledgement of the inevitability of this. And either we can treat one another with respect and care and see the value in dripping half the water out on the way home. Or like a 12-year-old, you can push it all off at a distance and go, la, 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 la. Nobody ever dies. Nobody ever gets sick. And I am immortal.
Yeah.
And it's quite sad that we get sold this fixation.
It's hard to sit with it. It's hard to sit with the idea of death and mortality and illness and all those things. And the degree to which we have a hard time sitting with it is also the degree to which we'll buy a promise out.
Oh, yeah.
So,
wow.
We can blame outside forces, but there's also the internal. Every day I have to sit with that, and one of the things that I like to practice is I'll write down a list of where my mind is in this moment. And where the list goes bad is when I try to hold on to it. I have to realize that it needs to be torn up and destroyed because it's no longer the now. And the same thing happens with music. Huh. I'm certain that it's rare that you can be certain about 100%, but I'm thinking 99.99% of musicians go through some phase in their life where they're growing and they're developing and they go, this sounds cool. I'm going to keep doing this. And you keep doing this. And somewhere it no longer sounds cool anymore. And you're wondering, why not? What happened? Why is this no longer? And then you buy the pedals and the fuzz pedal and the with the comb filter and anyway, whatever. And you go through the cycle again and again. And what you miss is that if any piece that goes on too long grows bitter, every piece, you have to know when to end it. You have to know when to stop. If you listen to any Beatles song, I'm a huge Beatles nerd, and you listen to it, there's no fat. It's all very trimmed. It's all extremely, like, they just said what needed to be said, and it's done. And it's that respect for that makes a huge impact.
Yeah, the Japanese have a phenomenon, but it has to do with the impermanence of things. I think it's called, is it Wabi Sabi? The imperfection of something is to be celebrated rather than. So if I wanted to mass produce a pot, it's the easiest thing in the world to get identical pots by the score. I've got a mold, I've got the material, so forth. But they have this, I don't know whether it's Wabi Sabi or what the heck it is, but the notion is, but the flaws are what make it individual. The flaw is what makes it beautiful. The flaw is what makes it impermanent. And we can't get caught up in, you know what? I wonder if, just as I'm sitting here talking to you about it, I wonder if Something like that is instructive because, in a way, without mentioning mortality, it's nevertheless bringing it to the front of your imagination. You know, that this is an impermanent phenomenon. And they've got another practice, which I absolutely love. They'll break a pot by accident, and then they'll put it back together, but they'll put it back together with gold in the middle, and they'll go, now it's better. Yeah. It's better because it's been restored with even more attention and love than we gave it when we created it. And you just look at that and go, wow, the Japanese are such freaky cool. It's such a strange culture.
You know, I'm thinking too, in terms of story, that when you're able to say the story and it's got a beginning, middle, and end, you've got this like it has a structure, and if you can respect that structure, there's something about that makes it that much more powerful too. You know, anyway, it just came to mind. For a while I was, you know, just to describe my praise of story, I had bought like 12 different books, I can see them from here, on how story is structured. And I read them all and I took notes on them. It's not like but a story didn't emerge from it. I have to have that from within. And maybe one day I'll get there. I have vague ideas, but to see that there's like the anatomy of it and how it lives in the mind, and like what it's like, the pained beginnings, the promise of something, the leading through, the vision, the options, the slaying of the dragon, the belly of the whale, all the, you know, everything that goes into it. And anyway, I'm not sure where I'm going with any of this, but
well, since you're a musician,
yeah.
you are in a unique seat to appreciate this, which is there is an enormous difference between reading it and then engaging in the act.
Yeah.
And then only when you begin to engage in the act do you then begin to appreciate the Beatles for what's 5 layers underneath. Yeah. And, you know, just the fact that you're able to point out that there's no fat on there. Ringo is a really good example of exactly that.
Yeah.
That the DNA was not just in the way they composed a song, but in each of the individual players. George Harrison went on to have a magnificent solo career that involved movie producing and introducing other cultures to Western ears. And I mean, he had they had to break up for him to flower because their thing was so tight and there was just no waste to it. But if there's a story that I tell about a real experience that I had where this friend of mine, he had struggled in Silicon Valley for years in a startup before the word startup became cool. And he had some kind of tech that involved compression of data for video streaming or something. Okay, well, just couldn't keep the lights on. He and his wife got a divorce. And he's working in, of all places, you know, there's Silicon Valley, and then there's the outlying communities where it's like, oh yeah, if you're down in Gilroy, that means you can't afford the rent in San Jose. So he's struggling away in Gilroy. And one day COVID comes along. And wouldn't you know, video streaming isn't a nice to have, it's an absolute essential. So a couple of companies, I don't know whether it was Zoom and Microsoft, but a couple of companies got into a bidding war for his tech. And because it was exactly what they needed in order to remove the chunk of data necessary to stream video. Okay, so all of a sudden he's sitting on literally hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a guy who's driving a 25-year-old Honda. And did he go out and get a new car? Nope, he didn't. One day he calls me up and he goes, hey, do you think you could help me move some stuff? And I go, yeah, no, absolutely. Sure. So I'm dressed, you know, like a bum. I've got my refrigerator moving clothes on. He picks me up in the old Honda. We go out to this restaurant, this old diner, owned by this old couple. Thing's been there for 35 years. And we roll in there. He says, hey, do me a favor. Let me do the ordering. I go, okay. So we go in there and the old gal says, so, hey, boys, what'll it be? And he says, listen, what can we get for less than $5 each? And she goes, oh, well, let me go in the back, see what I can find. She comes out, 2 orders of eggs and bacon and toast and juice and coffee and a couple of muffins in a to-go bag. And he goes, oh, Mary, I don't think we can pay for that. And she goes, oh, well, I got the order wrong, so, you know, pay what you can. So he says to me, she's been doing this for years. She's been feeding me like this. And then he told me about the money. And he said, do you know how much money I got from this? No, how much? It was blah, blah, blah. And I go, holy shit. When we left, he left behind a manila folder on the table. He had opened a trust for she and her husband. It was in his name, but he was leaving the documents so they could transfer it to their name. They just needed their signatures.
Yeah.
There was an ATM card in there. He had left them so much money that it wasn't even money. It was like, do whatever you want, folks. You're good to go from now until eternity. I mean, this is leave behind money for your kids.
Yeah.
So we're out there in the Honda looking through the window when she opens this thing up. It's a big stack of legal documents, and then it's this note and an ATM card. And then you see her shouting to her husband in the back, and he comes. Now she's in tears, but the husband comes running out, and he can't stop laughing. Because at no doubt there was somewhere in the midst of time they had a big fight over this. Sure. Like, why do you keep feeding that son of a bitch? And I say to him, I thought you needed me to help you move some stuff. And he goes, you don't think this is moving? And I go, oh, you fucker! The whole thing was so that you could tell me that punchline, which it was. That's why he did it. So anyway, but the epilogue to the story is that wasn't the last stop we made that day. We went to see his ex-wife.
Yeah.
And he gave her a chunk of money.
Oh.
And he said, you earned this. Because when you're sweating and straining and it goes nowhere. Yeah. I eventually got a Fisher cut bait, and she had her own career to pursue.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of the nicest gestures I'd ever seen. But then at the same time, but that was the kind of person he was. It was all, you could say in a way it was to save his own soul. Mm. Like I'd put her through a lot. Mm-hmm. And I want to, like if she found out I made a chunk of money and I didn't give her any of it, how would she feel about it? And this way she knows it's no harm, no foul, fair play. We're still pals. Mm. And that to me now, so that's a story that I told you, and it's got a hero and it's got a, barrier and so forth. But here's what I like about it is you and I, as I tell you that story, can experience much the same emotions about the people in the story. Mm. We can feel for what it's like to be that older couple, fighting over whether we should still be giving this guy free muffins. And you can feel what it must have been like to sit there in the car looking through the window when she finds the ATM card. And then she shouts to her husband like, Harry, is this what I think it is? And he comes running out and she's crying and he's laughing.
Yeah.
And that to me was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen is their interpretation of the whole thing was so completely different because she was going, what a sweet boy. Oh my God, what a lovely thing to do. And the husband's going, he's thinking to himself, well, wonders never cease. You never fucking know. You just don't know. Maybe it's best to just be a good person and see what happens. But I think I would have had the reaction of the old man. Yeah. I would have just I wouldn't stop laughing all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a good story. It touches off different people in different ways. And that the what it meant to the husband, what it meant to the wife, what it meant to him to give it to his ex-wife, to help there, and what it might mean to somebody else who hears that. And it clearly meant something to him. And
well, it was a beautiful day for me. At one point he said to me, he goes, I knew you'd enjoy this.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, he didn't give me any money and I didn't ask for it and I wouldn't have expected it. Yeah. But just to have the pleasure of watching him do that was just such a joy to see. It was a gift, Neal,
I very much enjoyed our conversation here. This is very good. And again, I really appreciate your skill at story and your ability. And I think the idea of care, I think, runs throughout the whole conversation that we had here today. I think how important that is. And Anyway, how can people find you? What would be,
Well, I'm pretty easy to find if they can just spell my name right, because I'm the only person on earth who spells it this way. So it's Neal Foard, Neal Foard. They can find me if they're interested in my storytelling course, which is actually quite good. It's storyfire.net. Most people have a hard time finding it because they forget the .net, but it's Storyfire, as in telling stories around the campfire, storyfire.net. And I'm a big believer in the program. It's the distilled wisdom of 30 years in advertising, teaching stories and trying to help people get better at it. But really the main reason I wanted to be here is I'm a fan, and I thought it would be wonderful to chat with you. And this went about how I thought it would.
Oh, wonderful.
Which is we're kindred spirits, Doctor. And the more we all find each other, I think the better off we'll be.
Well, I thank you for reaching out and for connecting, so we could have this talk. I think this was really good. So
right on.
I appreciate it.
Small note before we close. I've started a new video series on YouTube called Finding Flow with ADHD. It walks through the waves approach of the waves of focus, the wandering mind, the anchor, the visit, and more. It's all brought to life on screen. And if that sounds useful to you, check out the link in the show notes.